Back live here on News at Prime. Thanks for staying on. Let's turn to this now. Dubbed the Woolworths Looter, Mbuso Moloi was sentenced yesterday in the Durban Magistrates Court to a 3-year suspended sentence. He will also undergo correctional supervision for 18 months with community service of 16 hours each month. Moloi was caught on camera stealing food items from a Woolworths store during the July 2021 riots. For some reaction now in this case and the sentence, we are now joined by legal analyst Mpumelelo Zikalala. Good to have you presenting. Thank you very much for coming on. Of course, it is in a sense, if we were to get to the legalities of the matter, considered some form of stealing, of course, barring all the other action that would come with looting, including destruction of property and maybe the violent actions that arose. But all in all, does it fall, for example, within the realms of petty theft, or is it something a little bit more serious than that, or do we have a special law in South Africa that deals with looting?
Now, what we have is theft. Whether it comes to the pettiness of it or not, well, it depends on the item, and that will greatly matter when a person is being sentenced. But the common law crime that we have is theft, and that's a crime in which is being punished in this particular case. But it is not only the crime of theft that is being looked at, it's all the other factors and all the other criminalities or the other illegal conducts that have been conducted, in which then a court would then take a step back and say, if we need to punish these particular individuals, how are we going to do it? Now, the science behind that comes in the famous case of S versus Zinn that said you must look at 3 elements. Look at the crime that has taken place as you are focused on it now, which is theft. Look at the circumstances of the accused. What type of a person are we dealing with? Are we dealing with someone who is knowledgeable, who would have known to act better, was stealing not because they needed to feed themselves, but it's because he has not a mischievous mind? And then last, let's look at the interest of the community. What type of message do you want to send out to the community so that it acts as a deterrent to other individuals that might think that engaging in this particular type of act is going to give you a slap from the wrist? They must then realize that no matter whether you are rich or you are not, whether you are educated or not, if you do brush up with the law, the long arm of the law is going to catch you, and it's going to give you a very hefty sentence similar to what is happening now, and a criminal record that you'll have to live with the rest of your life.
Now, of course, you have to catch the looters, and in most instances they are not caught because the police, of course, are busy dealing with the other effects that come with that kind of a crisis and so on and so forth. But this particular gentleman was caught on camera, went viral, so there is that kind of evidence that caught the number plate of his car, and that's how he was traced, eventually arrested. Does that then make the work, I suppose, of the state a little bit easier to charge this individual?
Much easier. And I think it comes to the community policing processes or forums in which the police are always advocating that we must do, which is the active participation by the members of the public to say, let's work together on this. We know that you can be able to beat crime if you provide the information that is there. There's not enough number of police officials that can be everywhere every single time. So if you have technology like our cell phones and you can document important evidence that can lead to the arrest and successful prosecution of individuals, let's work together so that at the end of the day we're able to curtail and make sure that there's law and order in the country that we live in. If it wasn't for the person that took the video, then I don't think we'd be having these discussions today. So it's a perfect example of when the public or the community gets involved, there's much that can be achieved. And if only these type of processes can be more prevalent, and when members of the public sound alarms or they send information similar to this one, would have more successful prosecutions, and people who are sent to jail or are able to receive hefty sentences as it has been done in this case.
Yeah. Let's look at that sentence then. The lawyers are arguing that this gentleman is a morally, I beg your pardon, upright person whose only crime is looting a Woolworths, as if, of course, that is a minor issue. But they are also saying he has already lost his car that he put the loot in and is now recognized everywhere as the Woolworths Looter, and this obviously has affected him mentally and he needs therapy. They're saying he should just be fined 15,000 rands. Now, recently we saw in our courts a murderer who then later turned a gun upon himself and rendered himself really paralyzed. The court saying, well, look, you've already suffered a lot in terms of your actions where you are, that punishment is adequate. Would the court look at this gentleman and him having lost his car, having lost his health, being stigmatized and recognized as the looter, and say, well, you've already been punished enough, so a 15,000 rands fine is okay?
That's exactly the case that I was referring to, the S versus Zin case. It looks at that. It says, let's look at the circumstances of the accused. What we're trying to do here is not to kill a fly with a sledgehammer, but to say the punishment must fit the action that is taking place. And if you're already suffering certain consequences which are going to follow you wherever you are, then let's take those into consideration, just as long as they're going to send a very strong message to you to say that do not ever do this thing ever again. It is not profitable. It's not going to help you in any way. In fact, it sets you back, because if you hadn't taken that particular basket on that day, you wouldn't be sitting here in front of this court. You wouldn't have your name being splashed out in the media. And there's certainly not a criminal record that would be attached to your name or any other adverse information that might be there. Even if he goes and applies for a job, he will always be remembered as the Woolworths Looter. So if that's going to be part and parcel of the type of punishment which is going to follow him, then the court ought to take that into consideration. But at the end of the day, also say, let's look at the type of message that you want to send over to members of the public, to say, regardless of who you are, we are going to catch you and you are going to be punished in the appropriate manner. So it's not always in every single instance in which sending a person to prison is going to serve a much more effective way of punishing the individual. Punishment can be observed in a number of things. Yes, imprisonment is one of them, but there are circumstances where imprisonment is not going to serve any purpose. So in this case, I think that's what the court looked at and said it serves a much greater purpose and it teaches a much better lesson if this type of punishment and order is issued by the court.
And would the lawyers be able to appeal this particular sentence and just say, no, we just want a fine? I mean, whether a fine also carries a record or not, maybe something that you can also explain.
They can appeal. Any order or judgment in which you receive from a lower court, you can take it up. In this case, you can even go to the High Court, the SCA, even the Constitutional Court. But you have to follow the particular route before you get to the Court. But the risk that you run is that you can find even the High Court saying that, the magistrate erred in providing such a sentence which is so light. You need a much more heavier one in order to teach him a much more bigger lesson and a much more important lesson. If you look back and what the S versus Zin case actually says about the crime they're accused and the interest of justice or the community, or the message that needs to be sent to the community, is one of the things that must be considered. Now, with the fine, if you are fined up until an amount of 25,000 rands, if I stand to be corrected, then you are able to then expunge that particular record after 10 years since the day it was given. But if you get a sentence in which you do not get an option of a fine, then unfortunately you are going to live with that criminal record for the rest of your life. Those are all the things that can or that must be considered by the law. In my opinion, I think it's a much more fair sentence. It then says, I'm taking into account all the relevant elements that I'm supposed to look at the court. I've looked at your circumstances. I've looked at the crime in which you've committed, the prevalence of the crime. Theft is something that takes place every single day in South Africa, and it must be curtailed in one way or another, especially within the context of looting. It's something that it must send a strong message to members of the community to say, do not engage in this type of things. You may be many and you may not be caught, but those that are going to be caught are going to suffer the consequences. And lastly, you also realize that you do not want to kill the future of this young man. You have to make sure that he's able to grow, he's able to create a much and brighter future for himself. So the opening of the second chance through not sending him to prison is one of the things that I believe that the court looked at.
Kuzeni, let's wrap that one and indulge me a little bit, because we are in a period of lawfare, so we need to look at all these issues that are beginning to emerge. We are, of course, threading an unfamiliar territory. It's a new space where Parliament is engaged with the removal of a head of a Section 9. And we are seeing all these things working and playing out. The latest one is the Parliament wanting to change the approach from appearing live to written questions and written answers. Would this be something that is within the legal permutations, or is something that certainly the public protector can challenge?
You have to look at and say, when we started, what process did we follow? How is that going to affect the level of answers, the quality of answers that you are going to get? Now, the presiding officers are then robbed of an opportunity of asking further leading questions in the answers, because once that the set of paper or the set of questions have been answered, you cannot then write back and say, what did you mean when you're expressing this particular term, public protector? Please explain. However, in a setting in which there are proceedings which are taking place, you are able to say, you representing the public protector, do you care to explain what you mean about the answer that has just been received? There are level of discussions that are able to take place. So there's much greater engagement and interactions between the public protector and the people who are going to adjudicate the matter. And those are the individuals that need more time, need more information, and need to have access, and most importantly, all their questions answered. Now, if you reduce it to writing, you are then limiting the scope of the interrogation, limiting the scope of their discretion to a certain point, and then one wonders, are you going to be able to get a much more clearer, positive and much more clearer view as to whether the act in which the public protector is being accused of doing, she has done it or not. So if it's not going to assist this process in any manner, I do not think it is going to assist anyone. It's much better if you sit down, call a meeting or call a proceedings as you've been doing since day one, and then say, we are going to answer these questions, we are going to deal with it in an appropriate manner, let alone the type of constraints that might be there, let alone maybe the differences that might be there, maybe in the adjudication. And if you say you are avoiding the sitting down session because you are going to be accused of bias, then you are missing the point, because you being accused of bias and you being able to defend yourself goes hand in hand with the fairness of the process. Now, if you are going to deprive the public protector of a fair process, then the results of what you are doing there may be deemed to be unlawful and may be set aside, because procedurally they did not follow the principles of fairness, hence they can't be taken as something that is true and correct.
And can the public protector then use her protests against the approach that is being taken as her defense? Because she's seemingly not even missing the deadlines. I think where she is, she's not even beginning to engage with these deadlines at all, and she's just not responding to what the parliamentary committee is requesting her to answer to.
Let me separate it into three. Let's start with the responding. You ought to respond because you want to show that you are a willing participant in the process. It's just that you are not supporting the unfairness or the level where you are being prejudiced and your rights are being taken away in a manner that is not being fair. So you must respond. Don't ignore. But the second part is that whenever a matter goes to court, the court will look at two things: substantive fairness and correctness, and also the procedure which was followed. These two goes hand in hand. If one is not available, then it renders the whole process as something which has not been fair and cannot be lawful. So if substantively people are not going to assess the rules as they ought to have been, or are going to create rules as they go about, then it's going to be a problem on the substantiveness. Even on the procedural facts, on the procedural fairness type of elements, it also must be considered by the court. And in this case, one of the things which are going to be considered are, in you exercising this adjudication process in which you're trying to assess whether the public protector is fit and proper to conduct a job, did you follow processes that can be able to be stand the test of being whether they were fair or not? If the answer to that is no, then it means whatever ruling that you are going to come up with must be taken away, must be regarded as something which is unlawful and something that cannot be taken to be above board when it comes to legal compliance and things that ought to have been there. So if there's any lack in substantive fairness, any lack in procedural fairness, then that particular matter cannot proceed.
Despite the missed deadlines, the chairperson making it clear that the committee will continue in terms of the timelines set out, and the committee is expected to finalize its work July 28th. If indeed the committee continues like this, and the findings of this are adverse against the public protector, and she did not participate in this particular process, is that a clear grounds for a challenge?
It would be a ground in which the committee, if the public protector goes to court, will come back with and say, you know, you are challenging a process that you did not participate fully in it. You're supposed to participate up until the end. And then you can raise all these instances of injustice and unfairness that have taken place. Now, what is more important than being able to comply with the deadline is being able to comply with the substantive and procedural fairness of the process. It does not assist you in any manner to say that we're able to comply with the deadline that we're given by Parliament, and then you are found to be at fault when it comes to the substantive fairness that you've used in the procedural fairness or procedural aspect on the manner in which you've conducted yourself, because it's going to render the whole thing that you've been doing as useless. A lot of time and a lot of money would have been wasted, and that is definitely something which the committee does not want. So in order to protect yourself, I know the committee would want any single proceedings. All that you want to do is you want to make sure that you're able to save time and you're able to finish in record time as it has been stipulated. But when it comes to circumstances which are beyond your control, in circumstances which you can't control, then you have to let the process be, simply for the simple effect of saying that I want to save the substantive fairness of this process. I want to save the procedural fairness of this process, even if I go overboard by 5 or 10 years. But at least allow me to make sure that I've produced a quality report which is able to assist Parliament, who should be able to exonerate the committee members in the manner in which they've adjudicated the matter, and in which, if it is taken on review, a higher court will definitely say, you've done everything according to the book. Yes, we may have gone over time, but we have the satisfaction that everything was done correctly. Another factor that you might add, let's look at the State Petrol Commission. It was only stated or programmed or anticipated it's going to run for 6 months, and it ran for 5 years at the cost of close to R1 billion. So what was important was to say, not the time factor only, but let's just look at the results and the products in which we're going to produce. And I think the committee ought to look at that now and say, yes, we may go over time, but we just want to make sure that we are producing quality work.
Kuzen, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Big analyst there, Mpumelelo Zikalala.